Now, Alex, you're a journalist, you're in the field, and you've seen firsthand that media is a double-edged sword, as we've just been talking about. So, what are the challenges of trying to harness a media that might be inherently biased to spread a positive message about Israel?
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me, and I'm really privileged to be among such informative panelists. I think there's three key terms that were in the question that I just want to highlight at the beginning and will help take us through the answer. The first one, you talk about that the media is biased. The next one is that the media is a double-edged sword. And then you ask, what's the challenge of trying to harness it? All right, so these are three key terms. I'll start with biased. Tamar, you're correct that fake news is not new. However, we are seeing an increasing reliance on fake news. Media has always been biased, which means that whichever journalist is reporting the news is using his filter of what's going on to convey a message to you. That's a bias. Journalism by nature is unfortunately biased. Objective news has gone out the door a long time ago. But there's been a progression of journalism. We went from biased news, filtered news, to agenda-driven news. And you see this very regularly on CNN, on Fox News. No longer are we just applying our filter to what's happening, but we actually have an agenda, and we're going to use our time on the TV screen to impact the way the consumers digest the news and make them think what we want them to think. So that's agenda-driven. And when you have agenda-driven news, what happens is that oftentimes the truth doesn't actually fit into your agenda. And if the truth no longer fits into your agenda, well then you can report what's called fake news. We're going to actually make up the news in order to support and drive home our agenda. So we've definitely seen a progression here from biased news to all-out fake news. And today, even though fake news has been around for a few decades, we're now living in the age of fake news, where it's very, very difficult to understand the difference between real news and fake news. And why is that? Because everybody knows that the best lies are laced with the truth, right? So it's not just that one person says the all-out 100% truth and one person is just lying straight to your face 100%, but rather within a narrative that also involves some degree of truth, there are also lies. And this is what makes digesting news for consumers so difficult today. When you talk about the media also being a double-edged sword and the fact that this is the prophecy in the news conference, well, who was the first prophet? The first prophet was Adam Harishon, Adam, the first man. He was the first man, and he was the first one to talk to God. Now, he had a test. What was his first test? His test was not to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, right? And today, the tree of knowledge of good and evil is the internet and the media, okay? And we have a choice, both as journalists and as consumers. Do we eat from the tree or do we not? And today, knowledge is information, right? Which is why we have this fake news. So the question is, do we want to turn to the good or do we want to turn to the evil? The choice is always before us. But what makes this much more difficult is that today, the tree is in front of us constantly. It's not like the tree is just in the middle of the garden and we know we're not supposed to go into the middle of the garden, but today the tree is in our pocket. And in fact, we check the tree about 150 times a day, okay? And not only do we check the tree, but Facebook has made it really convenient to just go like this, like this, all day and all night, and when we can't sleep, and as soon as we wake up. And it's very difficult in this age of fake news to even know what's coming through our feed because Facebook, which I like to call a form of modern social media communism, has put every single media outlet into the same size box with the same size headline, and a consumer really has no idea what's behind Facebook's algorithm that put that piece of news in front of your face at that moment, whether it's 1:30 in the morning or 5:30 in the morning or in between lunch or whatever it is, and you don't even know who's the byline or who's the source of the headline that you just read. And in that way, you're really asking the consumer to be very informed about their ability to consume the news, right? So it's very difficult for journalists and for publications to first fight the Facebook algorithm in order to make sure that your truthful news or at least what you believe to be the truthful news, to get it in front of the consumers. And then the second thing about truth is that, I read this book called The Power of Trust one time, and it talks about trust being a bucket, right? And the way you build trust is by taking one drop of water at a time and putting it into the bucket. That means in order to build trust, it takes a long time of consistent, truthful effort. Yet, in order to empty the bucket, you could just kick over the whole bucket and just empty the bucket at one time. So building trust is so difficult because as people are going like this, they don't know who's putting the drop inside the bucket. So somebody else can kick over your bucket. It becomes very, very difficult. Now, how do we deal with this, right? So the Lubavitcher Rebbe one time met with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu before he became the ambassador to the United Nations, and he told him something which is an idea of Hasidic philosophy, which you can find in the Tanya, which is the Lubavitcher work. And he said that you're going into a house of lies and darkness, right? Now, the only way that you can survive in a house of lies and darkness is to be a single flame of truth, to be a single spark, right? And the Tanya teaches, in fact, that the greatest incremental gain in light is from complete darkness to a single candle, right? Any other increase is not as incrementally great as that first spark of light. So, really, the role of a journalist in the era of fake news is to be the single spark of light. And we know, as the people of Israel, that as one nation amongst many, and living in a dark world, that just to be one spark is actually, it's not only very powerful, but it's actually very attractive. And that's why we see people from all around the world trying to see what's happening in Israel. Why are the Chinese, why are the Koreans looking to see what's going on right in Israel? Because Israel is that one candle, and it's very attractive to look at. Now, just the last point, people have asked me in the past, why is it, how could it be that if you go to the far corners of the world, if you go into Norway or you go into any place, that people are anti-Semitic? There's not even a history of Jews living there, right? How is anti-Semitism reaching to all the corners of the world? And I thought about it long and hard, and it hit me one day that the reason why anti-Semitism spreads across the entire world really starts at home. I asked somebody one time, so what's the center of spirituality in the world? And they said Israel. And I said, good, okay. Now within Israel, what's the center of spirituality? So they said Jerusalem. I said, good. I said, now within Jerusalem, what's the center of spirituality in the entire world? They said the Temple Mount. I said, you're right. The Temple Mount is the center of spirituality in the entire world. And that's why when there was a Jewish temple, we know that the windows of the temple itself were shaped in such a way that they were narrower on the inside and wider on the outside, in order that the light from inside the Temple Mount would shine out, as opposed to the opposite, where the light from outside shines in, right? So the light from the temple shines out to the world. But if you go onto the Temple Mount today, instead of a Jewish temple where a Kohen Gadol, a high priest, is sending messages of Jewish spirituality to the world, if you go inside the Al-Aqsa Mosque on a Friday, you're going to hear the most virulent anti-Semitism that you could possibly imagine. And I live in Arnona, and right across the street from the Arab neighborhood of Sur Baher, and on Friday afternoon, the mosque blasts, and I don't need to be a fluent speaker of Arabic to know that what's coming out of the mouth of the imam is not words of love and peace, but rather it's virulent anti-Semitism. So as long as anti-Semitism is going to be broadcast from our holy places, don't be surprised that fake news and anti-Israel media bias is going to reach the far corners of the earth.